Hey, I'm Daniel, I'm weird and still a little bit sick, so sorry for my voice in advance. This time we're back, you guessed it, in New York City, or as I like to call it, the City of Islands. See, 4 of the 5 boroughs are technically islands, or at least sit on one. Manhattan Island, Staten Island, and then Brooklyn and Queens on Long Island. The Bronx is the only one sitting firmly on the mainland. But that's not all. There are dozens of smaller islands scattered around the harbor and the rivers. Governor's Island, filled with historic forts and parkland. Liberty Island, home to the Statue of Liberty. Roosevelt Island, with its aerial tram and apartment towers. And of course, Rikers Island, the infamous jail complex. Each of these islands has a clear purpose, but then there's one island that doesn't fit in at all. It's wedged between Manhattan, Queens and the Bronx. It's covered in highways, cut through by a major rail line, filled with unnerving institutional buildings, a huge wastewater treatment plant, and somehow is surrounded by dozens of sports fields, yet almost no one lives here. This is Randalls Island, probably the most depressing place in New York City. And in this video, we'll discover its past and present, and I'll show you why it became this weird and oppressive space in the heart of the city. Before the island was crisscrossed by highways and ramps, it looked completely different. For most of New York's history, Randalls and Wards were actually 2 separate islands, divided by a narrow tidal channel called Little Hell Gate. It wasn't big enough for ships, but it clearly split the north and the south sides. Back then, this was mostly a quiet institutional landscape. Starting in the mid-1800s, the city used the islands for things it didn't want in dense neighborhoods. Orphanages, hospitals, asylums, reformatories, you name it. Wards Island became home to hospitals and psychiatric institutions, while Randalls hosted the House of Refuge for juvenile offenders. There were, of course, some small internal roads and service docks, but no major highways. People and goods mostly came by ferry or little bridges. The railway was built first, and the Hell Gate Bridge opened in 1916, but more on that later. The most radical change to the island was the highway construction though. In the 1930s, Robert Moses, our favorite NYC main character, was causing trouble again and built the Tri-Borough Bridge. Instead of constructing 3 separate bridges to connect Manhattan, the Bronx and Queens separately, engineers realized that Randalls Island sat right in the middle. By merging the 2 islands and filling in Little Hell Gate, they created a perfect hub for all the bridge approaches to meet. The transformation was drastic. Huge areas were regraded and filled to fit the interchange geometry. Institutional buildings were moved or demolished, athletic fields were shifted around, and the western and central parts of the island were basically turned into one enormous highway junction. Today, Interstate 278 crosses Randalls Island as part of the Robert F. Kennedy Bridge system. One span arrives from Queens, another one from Manhattan, where it connects the interstate with the FDR Drive, and the third heads north across the Harlem River into Port Morris into the Bronx. All 3 converge on the island in a compact T interchange that funnels traffic between the boroughs before continuing east as the Bruckner Expressway. One detail that really stands out here on Google Earth is this widening of the roadways in the nearby area of the interchange. It looks like the setup for a toll plaza, but there isn't one anymore. That's because for decades there actually was a toll station right here on Randalls Island. Every vehicle had to pass through toll booths to travel between the boroughs. When the city switched to cashless tolling, the booths were removed, but the widened roadway is still there, like a relic from a bygone era. But before the cars entered our everyday life, let's take a look at what influence the railroad had on the island. Next to the highways, in a similar alignment, we can see one of the most fascinating pieces of rail infrastructure in all of New York. The Hell Gate Bridge and its adjacent viaducts, completed in 1916, were built by the Pennsylvania Railroad to finally connect New York City directly with New England. Before it existed, trains from Boston to New York relied on ferries across the East River or took long detours through Connecticut. Hell Gate changed everything, creating a direct rail link into Manhattan and Penn Station. Today it carries the Northeast Corridor, the busiest passenger rail line in the United States. Every Amtrak Acela train between Boston and Washington passes also right through here. When you follow the line on Google Earth, you can see how it crosses Wards Island on a long raised embankment. Then, before it reaches the arch, it swings into a curved viaduct. From above, that bend looks a bit alarming, to be honest, but totally something I would build exactly like that in city skylines myself. But no worries, we can totally trust our engineers from over 100 years ago here. The curve was needed to hit the narrowest crossing point on the East River, while still tying into existing rail yards in Astoria. Trains simply slow down to around 30 to 45 miles per hour here, so this is fine. The steel arch itself was the largest of its kind when it opened, and it even inspired, you guessed it, the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Everything was built with 4 tracks in mind, 2 for high-speed passenger trains and 2 for freight. The Pennsylvania Railroad imagined this as a dual-use super corridor, linking New England freight directly to their network in New Jersey. That freight boom never happened, and the bridge therefore was massively overbuilt. Although it's built the double amount, only 2 tracks remain in use, but untypical American, both fully electrified, just as they were over a century ago. The overhead catenary was installed from the very beginning to allow electric locomotives to reach Penn Station, which didn't allow diesel locomotives in their tunnels. What's fascinating is how the rail corridor and the highway system cross the island in parallel, each serving a complete different role, one carrying thousands of cars a day, the other moving some of the most important trains in the country. The western side of Wards Island has played a very specific role in New York's history. It has long been a place for institutions and essential services that the city didn't want to place in dense residential areas. Starting in the 19th century, the island became home to facilities like orphanages, almshouses, reformatories, and psychiatric hospitals. Its relative isolation, surrounded by water but close to Manhattan, made it ideal for users the city wanted to keep at distance, but still easily accessible by boat. The most significant institution here was the Manhattan State Hospital, opened in 1899. It grew rapidly, eventually becoming one of the largest psychiatric institutions in the United States, with over 4,000 patients. The complex consisted of multiple large red brick buildings arranged along the Harlem River. Many of these structures are still standing today, though their functions have shifted. Some now house health and social service facilities run by the state. But wait, do you know what I never really understood? Why were places meant for healing always built so ugly and depressing, especially in locations where people realistically had no chance of ever getting healthy again? And then even came the highways, which probably made everything even worse. Honestly, this looks like the most depressing place in New York. And this part of Wards Island seems to be just a kind of hidden service zone for all the things Manhattaners never should see. On the other side of the bridges, there is even the Wards Island wastewater treatment plant, a massive facility built in the 1930s as part of New York's modern sanitation program. It treats around 220 million gallons of wastewater per day, serving large parts of Manhattan and the Bronx. The plant dominates the central part of the island with its circular clarifiers and rectangular aeration tanks. This plant is one of the city's most important, important, quietly operating 24/7 just a few hundred meters from the RFK Bridge interchange. Together, the historic institutions and the treatment plant highlight a lesser-known side of Randalls and Wards Island. While the bridges, trains and ball fields often get the spotlight, this area has quietly been handling the city's social and infrastructural needs for more than a century. Today, most of Randalls Island is dominated by recreational spaces. Over the past few decades, large parts of the island have been transformed into athletic fields, stadiums, bike paths and restored wetlands, creating one of the largest concentrations of sports infrastructure in New York City. There are more than 60 playing fields here, roughly 1/3 of Manhattan's total baseball field capacity, used year-round by schools, amateur leagues and the city programs. The eastern half of the island is essentially one massive sports complex surrounded by highways and rail lines. At the center is Econ Stadium, opened in 2005 with a 5,000-seat capacity, hosting national and international track and field events. At the shoreline, wetland restoration projects near the former Little Hellgate Inlet aim to improve stormwater retention and reintroduce native ecosystems. One of the biggest practical challenges though is access. There's no subway station on the island, no regular bus route and no commuter rail stop, despite the Northeast Corridor running right through it. The only way in are by car, via the RFK Bridge, or on foot and bike using the Wards Island pedestrian bridge from East Harlem, or the RFK Bridge paths from Queens and the Bronx. This lack of direct public transit is a major limitation, especially for a site that hosts thousands of athletes, events and occasional emergency uses like temporary housing. It makes Randalls Island feel oddly isolated, even though it sits in the geographic center of the city. Randalls Island is one of those places that most New Yorkers drive past, but hardly anyone actually thinks about it. In this one small patch of land, you've got highways, one of the most important railings on the East Coast, historic institutions, a massive treatment plant and dozens of sports fields, all squeezed between 3 boroughs. It's not pretty, it's not easy to reach, but it's an incredible example of how different layers of New York's history and infrastructure stack on top of each other in a single overlooked spot. If you enjoyed this deep dive, let me know in the comments and tell me which unusual corner of the city I should explore next. Thanks for watching, have a nice day and bye bye.